If you can tell me what a Bitcoin really is, I'll give you one, right here in front of everyone.
Declared millionaire Ethan Whitmore, standing tall at the center of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, a crystal flute of champagne in his hand, and a mocking smile painted across his face. His words cracked through the expectant silence like a whip, and in an instant the room erupted in laughter. The echo of those laughs bounced off the crystal chandeliers, the gilded walls, the marble floor that seemed to tremble beneath the heels of the women and the polished shoes of the men. What would you do if the person who belittled you in front of 100 glittering strangers handed you the microphone and dared you to prove you belonged? Hold that picture. Let it burn a little. The ballroom at the plaza shimmered like it had been brushed with liquid gold. Manhattan's moneyed crowd, fund managers, founders, dynastic heirs, moved between marble columns and towers of white peonies, the string quartet smoothing out any awkward silence with Vivaldi. Banners for the Hudson Capital Summit hung like medals along the mezzanine, and on every lip was the same pair of words: Ethan Whitmore. Ethan was the kind of New Yorker who never learned to look up. The city had always bowed to him. Old money from Westchester, new money from tech and real estate, and the dangerous confidence of a man who had won more dares than he could remember. Tailored midnight tucks, cufflinks the color of a storm. He talked alpha like other people talked weather. At the back of the room, in black uniform and crisp apron, stood Maya Rivera, Queens-born, 28, delicate as a violin string but with a spine that knew hard winters. She'd crossed a city of noise for this shift. 2 trains, 1 borrowed coat, a promise to herself that she wouldn't cry again in public. Rent was due. Life didn't care that her mother's hospital bracelet was still in her purse. "Champagne?" she asked, offering the tray to a woman whose dress cost more than a semester at City College. "Lovely," the woman said without seeing Maya at all. The quartet slid into a Sinatra standard just as Ethan stepped into a pool of light at center floor. A host whispered something to him, and he smiled the way a cat might smile at a canary. But before we go on, we'd love to know, where are you listening from? Follow our channel so you don't miss a single story. We're here to share emotional, dramatic tales, but also to brighten your day and remind you that there is always hope. "Friends," Ethan called, tapping his flute with a silver spoon. "Investors, visionaries, professional pessimists, welcome back to New York's favorite casino, the market." A wave of laughter. He had them. "We're here to talk bets," he went on. "Calculated, disciplined, occasionally reckless bets. And speaking of bets," his gaze drifted, sharp as a searchlight, toward the service path where Maya stood. "Let's have a little fun." Maya felt the air around her tilt. She stepped back, bumping a column. The tray steadied in her hands. "Don't move," she told herself. "Invisible is safe." But Ethan had already crossed the floor, applause following him like confetti. When he reached her, the circle of guests opened, silk and satin rippling to make room for spectacle. "What's your name?" he asked, as if the answer were a coin he might pocket. "Maya," she said, quiet but even. Queens had taught her how to keep a voice steady in rooms that tried to steal it. "Maya." He tested the syllables, amused. "Tell you what, Maya, I'll give you—" He paused, savoring the hush. "1 Bitcoin if you can tell this room what Bitcoin actually is." A few men chuckled, arms folded. Someone murmured, "This'll be good." A younger founder lifted his phone, already recording. The quartet stopped mid-phrase, strings humming into silence. Maya set the tray on a nearby cocktail table without a clink. She looked at Ethan, then at the ring of faces shining with expectation. It wasn't the first time a man with too much money and too little kindness had tried to turn her into a party trick. But that night, in that light, something old and stubborn rose in her chest. The voice that had coached her through late-night study sessions and double shifts and grief that had no bottom, Stand straight, Mija. Knowledge is its own armor. She folded her hands in front of her apron. You want a precise answer? She asked. Ethan's grin sharpened. That's the idea. Bitcoin, Maya said, her tone warm as a teacher's on the first day of class, is a cryptocurrency, a kind of digital coin that works on a decentralized, peer-to-peer system secured by a public blockchain. It's issued through the process used to create and verify Bitcoin transactions, has a hard cap of 21 million coins, and is designed so no single bank, company, or government controls it. The words fell like clean glass into the hush. No tremor, no apology. Near the bar, a portfolio manager choked on his olive. A woman in emerald blinked, surprised into a smile. The young founder's phone tilted upward. He wanted to catch Ethan's face. Maya wasn't finished. She tilted her head the slightest degree, the way her mother used to when a student tried to bluff past a homework question. But since you're offering 1 Bitcoin, Mr. Whitmore, I have a question for you. She let it hang, just long enough to make curiosity itch. Do you know when it launched? Ethan's mouth opened, closed. Somewhere in his head, dates shuffled. Bubbles and busts, IPOs and exits. He could recite the birthdays of 3 unicorns and 1 senator's fund. But the one date she wanted slipped through his famously clever fingers. It was... He tried. The silence softened into a smothering thing. 2010? Maya's eyes held his without triumph, only clarity. January 3rd, 2009, she said gently. The Genesis block. The white paper came out the previous October. A ripple moved around them, soft at first, then gathering into real sound, a low chorus of "oh." A man at the edge of the circle breathed, "She's right." Another added, "Down to the day." The laughter this time wasn't cruel. It was the kind that recognizes a table just turned. Ethan's smile thinned. His cufflinks flashed as he adjusted his sleeve, a stalling move. "Cute," he managed. "You read a headline." Maya didn't blink. "Headlines don't teach you how to wire money to a hospital at 2 in the morning, she said, her voice still calm. They don't tell you which fees are real, or how long a transfer will stall, or what it means to move value without permission. You learn that on the phone with a billing department that doesn't care if you're crying. She didn't mean to say that last part. But there it was, honest as bone. A new kind of quiet settled, a listening quiet. Even the quartet, instruments tucked against their chins, waited. Ethan recovered the way men like him always did, by trying to make the stage bigger. He raised his flute. "Well then," he said, bright again, "a promise is a promise. 1 Bitcoin to Maya, if she can pronounce the name of the creator." Maya almost smiled. "Satoshi Nakamoto." A polite laugh bloomed, embarrassed and impressed. Ethan glanced toward his CFO, a man with salt and pepper hair and a face used to calculating exits. The CFO's expression didn't change, but he tapped his phone twice, as if reminding Ethan that a dare on a microphone is cheaper than a wire on Monday. Maya turned, lifted the tray, and offered champagne to the emerald-dressed woman who'd been holding her breath. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "That was brave." "It was just an answer," Maya said. But the room had felt the difference between just an answer and a woman defending the little square of dignity she could afford. Ethan's gaze followed Maya as she moved through the circle and back into the current of work. He was used to winning his laughs, to leaving other people with the awkwardness he'd created, yet now the awkwardness clung to him instead, like static he couldn't shake. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if a room full of people was measuring him against something money couldn't buy. And if you're feeling a tightness in your own chest right now, it's because you know this truth. The smallest question, asked at the right moment, can knock the crown off a king. "Music," the host said, almost pleading. The quartet obeyed, pouring notes like balm over a room that suddenly remembered its manners. Maya kept working. She refilled glasses. She fetched napkins. She smiled when she needed to, and she tucked herself back into the edges where people thought power didn't look. But in the corners of the ballroom, names were already whispering to one another. Maya, Maya, like a secret, like a seed. Across the floor, Ethan Whitmore lifted his glass and tasted a swallow that had turned metallic. He had meant a party trick. He had gotten a mirror. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing the story you told about yourself no longer fits. Would you cling to it, or would you risk the fall that leads to change? Imagine walking home after midnight through a city that glitters for everyone but you, and realizing 100 strangers heard your private pain because a rich man wanted a laugh. Maya's shift ended with the last tray. She changed in a staff locker room the size of a closet, folded her black apron with the same care she gave to the photo in her wallet, and stepped into a wind that cut up Fifth Avenue like broken glass. She rode the E to Jackson Heights, rocking with the tired sway of nurses, janitors, line cooks, the night shift nation. Her phone buzzed once, then again. A cousin in Miami. "Is that you on Insta? A co-worker from the plaza? Girl, they're talking about you." She didn't open anything. Not yet. Not when Rent sat on the kitchen counter with a blue sticky note that said final notice. Her studio on 82nd Street smelled faintly of a rose con gandules from the neighbor below and lemon cleaner from her own stubborn standards. On the fridge, a half-dozen magnets from city clinics. On the counter, a battered coffee can full of tips, rolled tight with hair ties. On the wall, a mass card with a gold cross that had faded to champagne. She eased off her shoes and took the hospital bracelet from her purse. The plastic was creased like old paper. Her mother's name rubbed nearly to nothing. Raquel Rivera. The letters were a shoreline, and she was still learning where not to drown. She didn't mean to cry, and she didn't mean to pray, but she did both. "If I embarrassed you up there, Mama, forgive me. I was just tired of being nothing to someone." Her phone would not stop nudging. Finally, she opened the messages. A link jumped her to a grainy video. Ethan in a halo of light, his voice amplified. Her, small in black, explaining Bitcoin like she'd been born on a ledge between two languages. Then the question, the one that shifted the room on its axis. The comments were already a storm. "Who is she? Queen of Queens right there. Waiter 1, rich guy 0, a Whitmore taking an L, pinch me." She shut it. Let them do their circus. She had an 8 a.m. at the cafe on Northern Boulevard and a rent envelope that needed cash, not clapping hands. Across the river, in a penthouse that watched the skyline like a general watches a map, Ethan poured 2 fingers of something old and tried not to think about how his name looked when paired with words like humiliated and corrected. The video thumbnail sat on his phone like a bruise. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. The memory had teeth. Ava Stein, his PR chief since before the world decided optics was a polite word, called without hello. "You're trending." "I don't trend," Ethan said, dry. "You do now." Maya Said is number 5. Genesis Block is number 7. The VCs are texting each other like freshmen. Cole Harrington already tweeted a joke about doing the homework. The clip makes you look, how to phrase this, like a man who's never stood in a line. "I don't stand in lines." That's the problem, Ethan. America likes its millionaires humble on camera and ruthless in private. You flipped it. We need a response. He paced to the window. The city breathed. Blue, white, 1,000 apartments where other people were making other mistakes. Draft something. Sincere, non-specific. Praise the staff. Throw in a gratitude to workers line. Send a bottle to the plaza team. What's her name again? "Maya," Ava said, voice softening. "Maya Rivera." He repeated it slower. "Maya." Ava knew that tone. She didn't like that tone. "Send flowers, not your conscience." "I'm not sending anything," he snapped. "She took the bet." And answered it, Ava replied. Ethan, the room didn't turn because she humiliated you. It turned because you asked a question like she was a wind-up toy. People are bored with kings. They want what's human. You remember human? He stared at his reflection in the glass and saw a man who knew how to price buildings and couldn't price one mistake. Fine, he said. Draft it. And Ethan, Ava added, gentle as a scalpel, don't try to buy your way out of this. Not with her. He didn't answer. He was already thinking of a donation to the hospital, a scholarship in some unoffending department, a photo op with EMTs. Money could be a language of apology. It had worked before. Morning in Queens is noisy hope. Garbage trucks groaning, school kids zipping jackets, abuelas sweeping their stoops like blessing the sidewalk. Maya tied on her cafe apron and pulled espresso for men who wore paint flecks like confetti. Her boss, Layla, slid a tip jar toward her with a grin. Someone came in and left this for the genius from the plaza. Inside, 2 20s and a note folded like a secret. For Raquel's girl. Keep your head up. Maya blinked hard. Who? Didn't say, Layla answered. Looked like anybody. The cafe bell dinged, and in walked a different weather. A navy suit with a face that asked where the VIP entrance was. He approached the counter with the caution of a man entering a church he didn't believe in. Maya Rivera? He asked. Depends who's asking, she said, automatic. I'm Sawyer, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. He offered a brief smile that never reached his eyes. He asked me to give you this. A crisp envelope with her name typed like a headline. Inside, a printed apology with all the sincerity money can structure, a gift card to a luxury grocer she had never stepped inside, and a discreet line about, the pledged asset will be transferred Monday. Maya slid the card back into the envelope and handed it to Sawyer. Tell him he can keep the grocery store. Sawyer blinked. People didn't hand New York's luxury back. And the pledged asset? You mean the Bitcoin he dangled like a treat? She said. If he wants to honor his word, he can do it without a press release. Sawyer hesitated. There would be a tax implication. We can structure... Then structure it to my mother's name, Maya said, surprising herself with the steadiness that rose in her. Raquel Rivera, Elmhurst Hospital Center, unpaid balance. She wrote the account number on the back of a receipt, the numbers familiar as prayer beads. He knows how to wire money. You all do. Sawyer took the slip, looking smaller than his suit. I'll convey that. Layla watched him go. You want me to keep the gift card? She asked, half teasing. Maya almost laughed. Feed the staff. Let's taste how the other half snacks. News travels in concentric circles. The plaza, Midtown, the chat threads of men who brag about returns. By lunch, the clip had climbed and the comments had matured into think pieces with sharp titles. By afternoon, a local station had found the cafe and asked for an interview in the kind voice reporters use to make a hard thing look like a soft one. Maya said no. She wasn't a symbol. She was tired. That evening, after the rush, she walked 2 blocks to drop off soup at Mrs. Kaplan's. The widow lived alone in a walk-up that smelled of onions and old novels. She opened the door with her cardigan half-buttoned and her gray hair defiant. I saw you on my niece's Facebook, Mrs. Kaplan announced, without prelude. Finally, a video that isn't a cat falling off a counter. Come in. Maya set the soup down and accepted the peppermint tea that followed, unasked. Mrs. Kaplan's apartment was a museum of the immigrant New York. Everyone pretends is gone. Sepia photos, menorah in the window, Met's pennant pinned above a chair because some loyalties are for life. He embarrassed himself, Mrs. Kaplan said, lowering into her seat. Men like that confuse showmanship with power. My Irving used to say, real power is who you choose not to humiliate. You stood up straight. Your mother would be proud. Maya's throat clenched. I didn't mean to say her name. Oh, darling, Mrs. Kaplan said, reaching across to pat her hand. Names save us. My mother said mine to me when the world didn't see me. You say hers as often as you need. On the other side of the river, the Whitmore boardroom glowed antiseptic. Cole Harrington lounged in a chair like he owned the building. He didn't, yet, but his fund had teeth in 3 of Ethan's ventures, and that made him family whether anyone liked it or not. Look, Cole said, flipping his phone to display the clip. It's not a crisis. It's a moment. Audiences love contrition. Do a podcast with a barista, post a photo in a Union t-shirt, pledge free whatever to the borough of the week. You'll be back on the yacht by Memorial Day. Ava's jaw tightened. And call me old-fashioned, we don't use a woman's dignity as a bumper sticker. Ethan, the cafe turned down your flowers. I didn't send flowers, Ethan said, startled. Ava arched an eyebrow. Because you listened for once. Good. Then listen to this. Wire the asset. No fanfare. To her mother's account. And stop talking. Cole laughed. You're telling a Whitmore to stop talking? Put it in a museum. Ethan stared at the muted TV on the wall, market tickers crawling like ants, headlines chewing on the same 3 stories. He thought of the way Maya had said January 3rd like it was a birthday, not a fact. He thought of the room's laughter turning into witnesses. He thought of his own face, the second before he guessed wrong. Do it, he said finally. No press. If I hear about a single camera, Ava, I'm serious. Miracles, Ava said, texting the transfer team. We're collecting them today. That night, Maya sat at her little table with an envelope of bills, her mother's bracelet, and the silence of a woman deciding whether to stay small because small is safe. The phone buzzed again, this time a call from a 718 number she didn't recognize. Miss Rivera? A voice asked when she answered. This is billing at Elmhurst. I wanted to inform you that the outstanding balance on Raquel Rivera's account was paid this afternoon. Anonymous donor. She closed her eyes and for a second saw a ballroom ceiling, all gold and glitter, splitting open to let in some kind of weather you couldn't buy. Thank you, she whispered, because that's what you say to strangers who bring you water in a desert. After the call, she stood. The room felt different, not richer. Not larger, just less afraid. She pulled a shoebox from the closet. Inside, under a sweater and the kind of letter you keep too long, lay a battered textbook. Financial systems, a human approach. Margins crowded with notes, corners softened by years. She had quit the degree when the bills piled and the hours doubled. But quitting isn't the same as forgetting. She opened to a page on trust. In the margin, her own scrawl from a younger year, who gets to hold the pen that writes what we're worth? Below it, another line, one she didn't remember writing. Don't wait for permission to answer your own question. Outside, a train thudded past like a heartbeat. Inside, Maya reached for a pencil. Meanwhile, in a kitchen gleaming like a showroom, Ethan stood alone, sleeves pushed to his elbows as if the work might finally touch his skin. He poured his drink into the sink. He didn't know why. He only knew the taste had turned to soap. His phone lit with a text from Ava. Transfer complete. No leaks. Also, ABC called, declined. You're welcome. His fingers hovered, then typed, what would it look like if I actually listened? Ava's reply came quick. Messy, slow, real. You'll hate it. Try anyway. Ethan set the phone down and stared at his hands. Long ago, at a dinner he barely remembered, a professor had told him money shows you what you love most by how easily you spend it. He had loved speed. He had loved the applause you can purchase with cleverness. He had not loved patience, or truth, or the kind of humility that can't be photographed. What would you do if the first fracture in your marble let in light? Patch it with gold leaf? Or learn to live with the crack? In Queens, Maya sharpened her pencil. In Manhattan, Ethan let the room stay quiet. The city, which contains all our contradictions and forgives most of them, exhaled. What if one quiet act of dignity, one voice refusing to bend, started changing people you'd never even meet? By Monday morning, the clip from the plaza had already spun into a phenomenon. Not viral like a cat video or a politician's blunder, but something rarer. Resonance. It wasn't the kind of story that screamed for attention. It whispered, and that whisper traveled faster than any shout. Podcasts dissected it. Think pieces bloomed overnight. The Bitcoin Waitress and the Billionaire Ego headlined one. Another asked, what happens when the invisible woman becomes the mirror? For the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore didn't recognize the man reflected in the business sections. Ethan Whitmore, once the face of innovation and risk, now finds himself at the center of an unexpected cultural debate about class, respect, and the performative nature of power. He hated the word performative. It made everything sound like theater, but maybe that was the truth. He'd been playing the same role so long, the visionary, the unflappable, the winner, that he didn't know what it meant to be a man off stage. In his penthouse office overlooking Bryant Park, Ethan sat in a silence that used to feel luxurious, but now only reminded him how alone the powerful can be. Ava Stein stood by the window, phone in hand. CNBC wants a quote, she said. They're framing it as a redemption arc. You say you've learned something, and we ride the empathy wave. Easy. Ethan looked at her. And what if I actually learned something? Ava's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Then don't say it. Show it. He nodded slowly, unsure what showing it even meant. In Queens, Maya didn't have time for think pieces. The cafe line stretched out the door. People recognized her now, which was strange. They ordered lattes and then whispered as if she were a news story that had walked into the room. A college kid asked for a selfie. An older woman left a note that read, "You made my granddaughter believe her voice matters." Someone else taped a printed headline from the New Yorker to the tip jar. Grace under glass, how one waitress exposed our class delusion. Maya wanted to tear it down, but Layla wouldn't let her. Let them see you, her boss said, hands on her hips. It's good for business and for hearts. After her shift, Maya slipped outside into the golden haze of early autumn. A breeze carried the smell of roasted nuts and subway smoke. She bought a paper from a stand, and there again was her name. She folded it before reading. She wasn't built for spectacle, she was built for work. But that night, she let herself pause. She sat by the window, opened her mother's old sketchbook, and on a blank page wrote, "Dignity is not silence. Dignity is the sound you make when they expect you to stay quiet." She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe to remember that one moment in that glittering room where she stopped being invisible. At the Whitmore Foundation headquarters, an emergency board meeting buzzed like a disturbed hive. Cole Harrington leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Ethan, you're trending in both finance and feminism. That's a hell of a crossover. We should capitalize on this before it cools." "Capitalize," Ethan repeated, tasting the word. "On her?" "On you," Cole corrected. "A narrative pivot. You're the man who changed. Maybe you launch an initiative, something for women in tech or underrepresented entrepreneurs. You look like the guy who learns from mistakes instead of denying them." Ava cut in, voice firm. "You don't get to use a woman's humiliation as a rebrand, Cole?" Cole shrugged. "Then don't call it that. Call it strategy." Ethan's jaw tightened. Enough. He stood, hands braced on the table. "We're done treating people like chess pieces. There's a human being in this story who doesn't owe me or you anything. So here's the deal. I want the foundation to fund scholarships for service workers pursuing degrees in economics or computer science. Name it after Raquel Rivera." Ava's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. Cole whistled low. "You're serious?" "Completely." Ethan met each gaze around the table. "If we're going to tell a story, Let it be about repair, not rescue. It wasn't a grand speech, but something in his voice, something unvarnished, made even Cole shut up. The first time Maya heard about the scholarship was on a rainy Thursday. A reporter came into the cafe, soaked but smiling, asking for a comment on the Raquel Rivera Fellowship. Maya froze mid-pour. "What fellowship?" she asked. The reporter looked puzzled. "You haven't seen the announcement? Whitmore Capital just launched it this morning. Full tuition for 10 workers a year. Hospitality, retail, anyone who's had to put school on hold. Named for your mother." Maya set down the cup. Her heart thudded once, hard. "He didn't tell me." "I think that's the point," the reporter said kindly. "It's not about him this time." That night, Maya took the long way home, walking through Flushing Meadows where the old World's Fair globe glistened in the mist. She sat on a bench and stared up at it, the city's metal heart, and whispered, "You see that, Mama? They said your name today." At a gala 2 weeks later, one she hadn't planned to attend, Maya found herself back under chandeliers again, but this time as a guest, not staff. The invitation had arrived anonymously, though she knew who was behind it. The event raised funds for the new fellowship, and she felt torn between pride and discomfort, like wearing someone else's shoes. When she entered, the room fell into a brief hush, the hush reserved for people who have become symbols without trying. She wanted to turn and leave, but then she saw a small display near the entrance, a framed photo of Raquel Rivera smiling in her nurse's uniform, next to a simple plaque that read, "In honor of those who worked quietly and taught loudly." Maya's throat tightened. She reached out, fingertips brushing the frame. "Beautiful woman," a voice said behind her. She turned. Ethan stood there, not in a tux this time, but a simple black suit, no tie. He looked smaller, not physically, emotionally, human. "You had no right to use her name," she said quietly. "I know," he admitted. "But it was the only name that mattered. I didn't want to make it about me. I just wanted to make it right." Maya studied him, searching for the arrogance that had once filled the Plaza ballroom. It wasn't there. "And the cameras?" He gestured to the room. "No press. Just donors and students. I made sure." They stood in silence. The string quartet played something gentle this time. No spectacle, just melody. "I wired the money because it was what I owed," he said finally. "The fellowship, that was something else. A way to start fixing a pattern. But if you don't want it, I'll shut it down." Maya exhaled. "You think you can fix people with money?" "I can't fix people," he said. "But maybe I can fix what I broke." For the first time, she believed he might mean it. Later, as the evening wound down, Maya stepped out onto the terrace overlooking Central Park. The city glowed below, each window a story, each light a choice. She heard footsteps behind her. Ethan again, hesitant this time. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "But not the way you think. It wasn't about Bitcoin or pride. It was about being seen." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "And now you are." She smiled faintly. "Being seen isn't the same as being understood." He didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Would you help me build the program? Not for PR, for real. I could use someone who actually knows what it's like to be on the other side of the tray." Maya looked at him, really looked. The arrogance had melted into something she recognized, effort, maybe even remorse. "Maybe," she said, "if it's about more than your redemption arc." "It is," he said softly. "It has to be." And in that strange New York twilight, the city both cruel and miraculous, they stood side by side, no longer mirror and reflection, but two imperfect people standing in the first fragile light of something that might someday be called grace. What would you do if life handed you back the microphone you once dropped? Would you speak for yourself or for everyone who never got to? What if the person who once humiliated you began to change? Not through words, but through actions so quiet you almost missed them. Would you forgive, or would you wait for him to stumble again? Winter came early that year. New York wore it like armor, cold wind slicing between the towers, steam rising from manholes like exhausted sighs. At the new Raquel Rivera Fellowship Center, a small brick building donated by the Whitmore Foundation in Long Island City, the first group of scholarship recipients gathered. The air smelled of coffee, printer ink, and new beginnings. Maya stood in front of them, a clipboard in her hand, feeling something she hadn't in a long time: purpose. 10 faces watched her: a single father from the Bronx who worked nights as a janitor, a middle-aged cashier who dreamed of finishing her degree, 2 young baristas with bright eyes and nerves. "Welcome," Maya said, her voice calm but steady. "You're not charity. You're proof. Proof that opportunity isn't supposed to be a favor. It's supposed to be fair." A ripple of soft applause followed. She smiled, blinking back tears. Her mother would have said, "Mija, even miracles need managers." Ethan stood in the back of the room, out of the spotlight, hands folded. He didn't speak. For the first time in his life, he didn't want the microphone. When the session ended, he waited until everyone left before approaching her. "You run this place like you've done it for years," he said quietly. "Necessity trains you faster than business school," she replied. "You learn when you can't afford not to." He nodded, almost sheepish. "I meant what I said, Maya. You built this. I just signed the checks." She studied him for a moment. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something humbler, slower, like a man rebuilding from the inside out. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "To see if I can stand in a room and not make it about me," he answered. Her mouth curved slightly. "How's that going?" He chuckled. "Work in progress." Maya looked around the center, at the laptops, the second-hand chairs polished clean, the small mural of her mother painted by a volunteer artist. "You kept your word," she said softly. "That's rare in your world." "I'm trying to make it less rare," he said. "I started visiting our other employees too. Janitors, receptionists, the ones who know everyone's name but get ignored at lunch." "And?" she asked. He hesitated. "I didn't like what I learned. About me, about the company. I built an empire that rewarded speed and punished decency." Maya tilted her head. "So fix it." "I'm trying," he said again, quieter this time. "But people like me, we're not used to asking how. We're used to buying who." She looked at him then, truly looked. For the first time, she didn't see the man who humiliated her. She saw a man haunted by the sound of his own applause. Weeks passed. The fellowship grew roots. Local papers started running stories, not about Maya, not even about Ethan, but about the students. Single mom lands coding internship. Veteran completes first semester at NYU. A barista builds financial literacy app for teens. The spotlight finally shifted where Maya wanted it to be. Then came the call. Ava's voice trembled for the first time since Maya had known her name. "Ethan's been hospitalized. Heart scare. Nothing fatal, but serious enough." Maya froze. "When?" "Last night. Exhaustion, stress, all of it catching up. He told the doctors not to call anyone. But I thought you should know." Maya hung up without answering. She didn't owe him anything. He'd done what he could. He'd changed. Maybe. But her life was finally her own again. Still, she found herself at Mount Sinai that evening, standing in the fluorescent hallway outside his room, unsure why her feet had carried her there. Ethan lay pale against the sheets, monitors whispering his pulse. He opened his eyes slowly when she entered. "You look terrible," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You always did have a way with compliments." She pulled a chair beside him. What happened? Doctor says it's stress. I call it destiny. Maya crossed her arms. You think your heart attack was punishment? He shrugged weakly. Maybe reminder. That money can't outbid time. Silence settled between them, not heavy, just human. Then he said almost shyly, You know what's strange? When I thought it might be over, I didn't see my buildings, my cars, my balance sheets. I saw the ballroom, you, standing there, telling me the date. Maya's breath caught. Why? Because for the first time in years, he said, someone told me the truth and didn't care who I was. She looked away, blinking hard. That's what you needed all along. Not applause, reality. He closed his eyes. And forgiveness. Maybe someday. Maya stood. Forgiveness isn't a trophy, Ethan. It's something you stop asking for when you finally understand why you need it. He nodded, eyes still closed. I'll keep trying. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she heard him whisper, Tell Raquel I said thank you. The words pierced her like light through glass. She didn't turn around. You already did, she said, and walked out. Months passed. Ethan recovered slowly. The tabloids lost interest. The city, as it always does, moved on. But the quiet work continued. The fellowship expanded. Maya started teaching part-time classes in financial literacy at community centers, using her own story as a bridge between worlds. She told her students, knowledge isn't power, it's armor, and sometimes it's forgiveness. They wrote that on the whiteboard like scripture. One afternoon, as she was locking up, she noticed a letter slipped under her office door. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat. Inside, a simple card. Maya, your words changed more than my reputation. They changed my reflection. Thank you for showing me what real wealth looks like. Ethan below. It was a single Bitcoin address scrawled in pen and a note. For the next student who reminds you of yourself. Maya smiled. She would never spend it. Not the coin, not the message. She'd keep it as proof that change, like interest, compounds quietly. That night, she visited her mother's grave for the first time in years. Snow dusted the ground. The city hummed in the distance. Guess what, Mama? She whispered, kneeling. They say your name in boardrooms now. She laughed softly. You always said dignity would outlive money. Turns out you were right. The wind tugged her hair, gentle as a blessing. And somewhere across the river, Ethan Whitmore stood on his balcony watching the same sky, wondering if grace always arrived disguised as loss. Because sometimes the real redemption isn't a headline or a grand apology. It's the quiet decision to become the kind of person who no longer needs to be forgiven. What would you do if the person who hurt you finally understood the lesson life tried to teach them through you? Would you turn away or help them rise? What if forgiveness wasn't a moment, but a process, like dawn creeping through a city that refuses to stop dreaming? Spring arrived in New York not with warmth, but with courage. Tulips pushed through cracks in Central Park, taxi horns softened in the evening, and somewhere between all that noise and hope, two people who had once been enemies began learning how to walk the same road, slowly, carefully, honestly. The Raquel Rivera Fellowship was no longer a headline. It was a heartbeat. 40 new students now filled the small classrooms every evening. Baristas, cleaners, line cooks, immigrants, parents, dreamers. Maya walked among them, clipboard in hand, the smell of strong coffee and ambition in the air. Remember, she told them, you don't need permission to learn. You only need the courage to stay when it gets hard. A hand rose in the back. Miss Rivera, a young man asked shyly, are the stories about you and Mr. Whitmore true? Maya smiled, shaking her head. Stories change in the telling. What's true is that dignity is a currency that never loses value. The room filled with quiet smiles. After class, Maya lingered by the mural of her mother. She traced the painted outline of Raquel's face and whispered, "We did it, Mama. Your name stands for something again." Outside, a familiar figure waited. Ethan, in rolled sleeves and no entourage, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said. "You keep showing up," she replied. "At least you learned consistency." He laughed softly. "That's something, right?" She nodded toward the building. "You should see their projects. One of them's building a financial literacy app. Another wants to start a tutoring center in the Bronx. You gave them a chance, Ethan." "No," he said. "You gave them one. I just signed where you told me to." They walked together toward the East River. The city glittered beyond. Glass towers, bridges, lights that pretended to be stars. "I keep thinking about that night," he said. "The ballroom, the laughter, the look on your face when I tried to make you small." "You don't need to relive it," she said quietly. "I do," he answered, "because I need to remember who I was, to keep becoming someone else." She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the man who had humiliated her. She saw the man who had paid her mother's debt, who had listened instead of defended, who had learned to let silence speak. "People change," she said, "but only when they stop trying to win." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally losing the right way." They stood at the railing as a ferry passed, its lights scattering gold across the dark water. "I want to ask you something," Ethan said. "Not business, not publicity, just human." "Go on." "Do you think someone like me deserves forgiveness?" Maya took a long breath. The air was crisp, salted by the river. "Forgiveness isn't deserved," she said softly. "It's offered when the wound stops defining you. And I think you're almost there." He nodded slowly, eyes glassy in the city light. "Almost," he repeated. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "But redemption? That's earned, every day." He smiled because somehow that answer felt kinder than any absolution could have. A year later, the fellowship hosted its first graduation ceremony. It wasn't held in a grand ballroom, but in a sunlit community hall in Queens, decorated with wildflowers and folding chairs. The students wore simple blue sashes embroidered with the words, "For Raquel." Maya gave the closing speech. Ethan sat quietly in the back. No cameras, no spotlight. Just a man who had finally learned that presence was louder than pride. "When I was a girl," Maya said, standing at the podium, "my mother told me that the world would try to measure my worth by how quiet I could be. Tonight, I want you to remember this. Silence is not humility when it protects injustice. Speak, learn, rise, and never forget where you started." Applause filled the room, loud, warm, unpolished, the kind that came from people who understood struggle, who had fought for every scrap of their own story. Ethan clapped until his hands stung. When she looked at him, he didn't look away this time. He mouthed just one word: "Thank you." After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned, he approached her. "I was thinking," he began, "about expanding the fellowship to other cities, Chicago, Boston, maybe LA. Would you?" She smiled. "You don't need my permission, Ethan. You just need to keep it honest." He hesitated. "Still, I'd like your help." Maya glanced toward the stage where her students were taking photos, laughing, hugging. "Let's see," she said, "if I have time between changing the world and grading essays." He laughed quietly, and for the first time she joined him. It wasn't the awkward, careful laughter of strangers, but the free kind, the one that sounds like forgiveness has already begun. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Maya returned alone to the empty hall. The lights had dimmed, but the mural of her mother, painted again for this new space, still glowed faintly in the shadows. She whispered, "He's changing, Mama. Slowly, but he is." and for the first time in years, she felt peace settle over her like a shawl. Soft, earned, true. Outside, the city moved as it always had, impatient and alive. Somewhere, Ethan walked home through the cool night, past the towers that once made him feel invincible. For the first time, he didn't look up to measure his worth. He looked forward. Because the truth was simple. He hadn't saved Maya. She had saved him, by refusing to let him stay the same. At dawn, sunlight poured over the East River, gilding both sides of the city, the penthouses and the walk-ups, the marble and the brick. And if you had stood there between them, you might have felt what they both learned in their own ways. That dignity, once awakened, never goes back to sleep. That love, in its purest form, is not romance, but respect reborn. And that redemption, the kind that truly lasts, always begins the moment someone says, "I was wrong," and another answers, "I believe you can do better." 1 year later, an article in the New York Times, former billionaire Ethan Whitmore quietly steps down from his board positions to focus full-time on the Raquel Rivera Foundation. Maya Rivera named executive director. At the bottom of the page, a quote from Maya. "Some lessons can't be taught in universities. You learn them when someone tries to make you small and you realize you're not." And below that, Ethan's words. "The smartest person in the room once served me champagne. Now she teaches me what wealth really means." So if you followed this story to the end, ask yourself this. What kind of wealth are you building? The kind that fades or the kind that frees? If this story moved you, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and what part of Maya and Ethan's journey touched your heart the most. Because maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need more power. It needs more people brave enough to turn humiliation into grace and pride into something finally worth sharing. Thank you for walking with us through this journey of dignity, memory, and rebirth. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, we'd love for you to stay. There are still so many stories waiting to be told. Stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that a second chance can come when we least expect it. Subscribe, leave a like, and help us keep sharing these moments of hope and humanity. Your presence here means more than words can say. Until next time, stay gentle, stay strong, and keep believing.